Hey guys, so for today's video, I am going to be reading online stories about Ouija board experiences. I have always been very intrigued by these, even though I have never played personally, but I like to hear people's stories about them. All right, so grab whatever you need to get comfy. I have my drink right here. I have tequila and squirt. All right, let's get started. All right, guys, so the first story is by the city_girl. And it says, the one I'm sharing tonight is not mine. It is my mom's, but she's one of the most honest and skeptical people I know. It's also been corroborated by other people who were there, and I've seen a clipped article that also shows that a certain thing happened. Names have been changed to protect privacy for reasons that will become obvious. When my mom was a young high school student, Ouija boards had become so popular that they'd even make their way into her small Midwest town, and they'd become mainstream enough that her Lutheran parents let her get one for sleepovers. My parents would never. The first night they'd ever played, their questions started off innocently enough. They'd ask things like, does anyone have a crush on me, or what will I become when I grow up? The Ouija board was unresponsive at first, but then it became more active, which was followed by good-natured accusations of who was pushing it, but they continued to play. The questions got progressively darker until at one point someone asked, will anyone we know die soon? Okay, I'm a total skeptic, like my mom, but even I would never ask that. My mom said that until then she hadn't taken any of it seriously, but that a chill went through her and she felt distinctively unnerved. The feeling intensified when the planchette slid onto the E, then slowly crept over to M, at which point everyone shot looks towards my mom. When it made its way back to E, she said she got a profound feeling of dread, and she jerked her hands away. Considering my mom is named Emily, everyone understood why she'd react that way, and they stopped playing. Obviously, nothing happened to my mom. But less than a month later, my mom's best friend's boyfriend, Emerson, was tragically killed in a car accident. Her best friend had been there that night. She's the one who had asked the question. When I was a little older and heard this story again, I said, you know, maybe it really was meant to have spelled out Emily. If you hadn't been taking it very seriously, maybe one of your friends decided to mess with you so that you'd be creeped out and get more into it. But of course, we'll never know. And yet, when visiting my maternal grandparents one summer, my friend and I found the exact Ouija board stored up in the attic. One day when there was a raging thunderstorm, we brought it all the way down to the finished basement to play for the first time. This was middle school and we didn't have cell phones yet, nor was there a clock in this particular room, and we weren't wearing watches. We were young teens and it was summer vacation. So when we became immersed in the board, we lost all track of time. Just like my mom had experienced, at first nothing happened, and then it became active and flew all over the place with answers to our questions about the spirit's identity and origin. Like my mom, I'm skeptical of these things, so I was convinced my friend was moving it, and at a certain point I said so, but naturally she denied it. As a test, I held eye contact with her so that she couldn't try to look around for the answer, as I asked, what time is it here right this very moment? The board immediately spelled out 2:31. We jumped to our feet and raced up 2 flights of stairs to the kitchen where I knew the nearest clock was located. It was 2:31. I'm sure it was either one amazing guess or my friend has a freakishly good sense of time. But the experience made my mom's story about the exact same board just a little bit more creepy. I would throw it away at this point. I do not want it around me. No, 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 no. Okay, guys. So, second story is called Are You a Bad Ghost? And this is by Haley Catherine. I thought I would share a story of my dad's. Our family has many stories where none of us can quite explain it. To non-skeptics, we believe we are definitely clairvoyant to some degree. My parents tell me stories from when I was younger. I'm not as in tune to it as they are, but this story of my dad's is from his days growing up in a small town outside Toronto. The boys in the story, many of them now fathers and grandfathers, refuse to discuss the story unless they are all together. had a few beers, and the lights are all turned on. Other than that, it is not talked about. The house I am going to refer to has two parts to the story. 1. My dad and his friends had gathered in the basement of Jason's house. I have changed all names for privacy. And were doing what kids at that time did, smoking cigarette butts that they stole from the ashtray and playing with games and toys. One of the boys had found a Ouija board. With little else to do, they decided why not play it. They began with silly starter questions, like, does this girl at school like me? Will I pass the English test? And they decided to get more brave. Is there a ghost down here? Yes. The Ouija board led their hands to the answer. All the boys giggled, thinking this was fantastic. Are you a nice ghost or a bad ghost? Yes, the Ouija board said back. Jason smacked the question asker in the back of the head, explaining that they need to ask single questions. Are you a nice ghost? No. The boys got quiet and one of the lights in the basement lit out a loud pop before the corner of the basement went dark. This is the mid-60s and this home was pre-World War I. Light bulbs are going to pop. Are you a bad ghost? Yes. A second light popped on the opposite room. Only one light remained in the basement above the boy's head. What's your name? They watched as the board began spelling out letters, with one of the boys keeping track. William. It says William, the boy yelled out. They felt a flood of air surge through the room, and the next part none of them can explain. The air moved the Ouija board across the room and all the boys stood up and backed across the room, staring at a lone mirror in the room, only they didn't see the reflection. They saw an older man with dark black eyes and a long beard and circular lenses staring back at them. They all started yelling, "Go away," and the mirror slid off the wall and shattered before the last light went pop. The boys went back upstairs and refused to play in Jason's basement ever again. Alright, so this is the second part of the story. 2. Flash forward to many years later. Jason's mom has sold the house and moved across town, and Jason and my dad were left to pack up the home. That included the basement. My dad kept loaded boxes and people had been in and out all day helping. He got downstairs where a man was standing by a washboard, not doing anything, just standing. Naturally, he asked the man if he could lend a hand. The man stared back. He seemed to have a glowing look to him, but my dad chalked it up on the basement lights. The man said nothing, so my dad continued grabbing boxes and taking them upstairs. He saw Jason and told him there was some weird old man downstairs. Jason was white as a sheet and said, "The moving truck isn't back. No one is here but us." They both went back downstairs and saw the same figure, only it was slowly walking from corner to corner of the basement with its back turned. "Excuse me, who are you?" Jason asked, before the man began screaming. My dad describes it as deep yelling that got louder and higher pitched, like a kettle screeching on a hot stove with the lights flickering. Both of them couldn't find their feet, and suddenly it all at once stopped as soon as it started. They both turned to look at each other and back at the figure, only instead of being at the other end of the hall, it was standing right in front of them. They could smell something that reminded them of sick, and could see every line on this man's face, but there was no eyes. They finally turned to run and let the movers return and do the rest of the work. They only shared single glances, and they were reminded of that night as children, when they are sure they saw the same face with black eyes. When Jason was unpacking boxes, he found an old photo album and flipped through it. He saw a picture he had never seen. His mother told him that was his great uncle William, who had lived in the house a long time ago. William had gone crazy and drowned 2 of his 3 children. The daughter was with the mother. And when his great aunt Shirley came home, she found him in the basement when he had hung himself. But over his face were scratches where his eyes had been. There was no doubt in their minds that they had seen William. And one of the reasons why Jason's mom finally decided to move was that in the bathroom, quite often she would find water all over the bathroom, which she thought was a part of faulty plumbing. But the boys are sure that it was William. Wow, well, whether it was the plumbing or not, I'm glad they moved because it's obviously haunted. Alright guys, so this next story is by Fable Goes West. In high school, my then best friend and her sisters were very into scary things. Halloween, scary movies, you name it. Sophomore year, they were given a Ouija board for Christmas. I was very intrigued and couldn't wait to play with them, even though my mother stressed how dangerous it was. I dismissed it, reflecting that if my friend and her family weren't concerned, why should I? I still remember my mom warning me that bad things could find their way in, but it didn't make sense. It was just a board game. At first, it was super fun. We asked stupid questions, accusing each other of moving the planchette, blah blah blah. And it went on like that for a while. I'd go over, we'd play, sometimes we'd be freaked out, sometimes we'd laugh, that was it. One time, however, I came over and they informed me that the board had given them strange information about the knife in the wall, my friend said. The knife in the wall was from the previous owners. I don't remember when, but sometime during my best friend's childhood, she and her sister discovered a small hidden hole in the wall in the closet. It was obvious the previous owner who had used it had a small place to keep special things, as they found pictures, if I remember correctly, and a knife with the name of the previous owner carved on the handle. After informing their mother, the stuff just ended up staying there. They couldn't return it to the previous owner. He had been an elderly man who had hung himself in the garage long before, as they reminded me whenever we were trying to scare each other during sleepovers. Anyway, my friend and her sisters informed me that that day, the board had randomly spelled out, "No move knife." They had apparently expressed confusion, and the board had spelled out closet. The board then confirmed it was speaking about the closet knife. When asked why they shouldn't move the knife, they recounted that the board had spelled out bad happen. So they had decided that the spirit had meant something bad would happen. Finally, my sister's friend asked what would happen if they moved the knife from the closet, and the board spelled out fire. According to my friend and her sisters, they believed the spirits were trying to tell them a fire would happen if they moved the knife. Well, that was terrifying to me, but I wasn't sure if I believed it. Either way, my friend firmly stated they would not touch anything in the little hole. Fast forward about 2 years later, and we've all lost interest in the Ouija board. We no longer played with it, and we hadn't touched it in years. I get a call from my friend, and she's almost hysterical. Finally, I'm able to understand. There was a wet/dry vacuum left plugged in their basement, and an electrical fire sparked. Thankfully, no one was home, and their 2 dogs and 2 cats were rescued by firefighters. The inside of the house was almost completely damaged by smoke, and they had to live somewhere else for a while. It was a very difficult time for them. Thankfully, they are able to recover and move on. Years later, my friend and I had an unrelated falling out, and haven't spoken in some time. My mother and I run into her mother, and they begin talking and catching up. Her mother begins to reminisce about the fire, and she says she could have sworn she unplugged the vacuum downstairs. She had been using the vacuum that day, she explained. She had been deep cleaning the whole house, including, she mentioned, some things from the previous owner. He even left a knife in the closet, a knife. I wanted to move it, but the girls freaked out. So I just waited until they weren't looking and I got rid of it. It hit me then that the Ouija board had made good on its threat. No. Thankfully, no one got hurt by that fire. I wonder who that man was though. And why was that knife so important? Alright guys, so the last story is called Deliberately Evil by Ouija Outback. Names have been changed. Directly after graduating high school, I moved out of my parents' home and rented a house with my best friend Jacqueline. We were both 17/18 years old. We were regularly throwing huge parties, staying up until sunrise, and enjoying living on our own for the first time. Somehow we came across owning a Ouija board, and this is where my haunting begins. I grew up in a very religious household and full-heartedly believe in God, good and evil. I've always been very spiritual. When Jack, other friends, and I started to play this Ouija board, I was the communicator. Nobody else spoke to the spirits or to the board other than me. Time and time again, we would have spooky encounters, but nothing to seriously freak out over. Our house was basically a 24-hour hangout spot as we continued to play the Ouija board. More friends, friends of friends, and complete strangers started reaching out to Jack and I, asking to come over and play the Ouija board. People around our small town were hearing that Kathy and Jacqueline were communicating with ghosts, real ghosts. Although spiritual, I don't necessarily believe in ghosts. I do believe in demonic spirits that thrive in the form of physical oppression, mental anguish, and unexplainable events. What occurred over the next 3 months of my life would only solidify that belief. The first real WTF moment we'd had was during a Ouija session with one of the larger random groups of people that visited. Everyone was standing around the table where I was seated with one or two others. All of a sudden, a girl lost consciousness and falls to the ground. Her dead weight hit the floor. She nearly immediately regained consciousness and seemed more embarrassed than anything. She basically dusted herself off, nervously laughing, as we all mumbled to one another about what in the hell was that, with some laughter here and there. We disbanded the session not long after, and this experience only gains attraction for Jack and I hosting Ouija board nights. We'd been playing for a few weeks and had plenty of moments where an answer on the board made the hair stand up on the back of our necks, or the whole room audibly reacted in a frightened manner. Since the girl passed out, nothing physically had taken place. She had become extremely comfortable and felt rather honored that I was the main communicator, although everything I was doing went against my upbringing. My mom had warned me against this kind of thing. I knew to never tell her what I was up to. One day, the encounters became physical. Jacqueline and I were getting ready for a night out in Washington, D.C. I was in the shower and then I heard an insanely powerful bang, bang, bang on the bathroom door. It was only Jack and I at home, and I knew I left the bathroom door unlocked for her to come in if needed. The pounding was so strong that it moved the door in and out of the door jamb, the light strobing from more to less as it shone through the open crevices around the door. Yeah, wondering why in the hell Jacqueline was pounding on the door. No answer. Jacqueline, I yelled again, waiting to hear her response. I waited about 30 seconds and then turned the shower off, soap still in my hair and all over my body. It was completely silent in the house. Jacqueline, I cautiously called out. She never responded, so I stepped out of the shower and quickly grabbed a towel. She had just gotten a puppy, Rue, and I couldn't hear her barking at anything. For a moment, I wondered if they'd both just been abducted. I walked out of the bathroom and immediately turned the corner to enter my bedroom where Jacqueline is sitting on the floor doing her makeup. Jacqueline, I said, panicked. What? She responded, laughing kind of confused. Did you just pound on the bathroom door? I asked. No, she said. Did you hear that? I asked, now visibly freaked out. No. She stood up and we huddled together as I recounted what had just happened. Jacqueline and I were thrill seekers. We were popular, sought out trouble together, and we thought we were invincible. This was fun, and while scary, it was adrenaline-inducing. We had the club to get to, so we rushed and finished getting ready. The entire time we were getting ready from that point forward, Rue would randomly start backing away from specific places in Jacqueline's bedroom with her head down. She would growl and bark at seemingly nothing. She'd never done this before. Jack and I were squealing, totally freaked out, but again, entertained and more focused on partying. We went out for the night and thought nothing more of it. From that point, I started to have experiences that I felt were only explained by a haunting of sorts. Once in my room, alone at home, I smelled something burnt in my closet. We smoked pot, maybe it was an old joint or something. I traced the smell to an old notebook where I'd keep notes from Sunday church sermons. One single page in the midst of hundreds was so badly burned that as I opened it, ashes fell to the ground. It was one specific page with some scriptures on it. No other page was burnt or even marked, just the one. It was still attached at the top in perfect condition, the serrated line untorn and unburnt. Other times I'd be alone at home doing my makeup, on the floor in front of my mirror, and I lose a foundation or mascara that I had physically been holding and set down directly beside of me. After spending minutes looking for it, I'd find it exactly where I set it in the first place. During instances like that, it was as though someone was watching and snickering at me. I felt like someone was deliberately playing tricks on me. The most persistent physical encounter would be when I laid down to sleep. I'd hear relentless scratching on my ceiling. It would always be directly above where I lay. Scratching, 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 like someone was trying to claw their way to me. Jacqueline witnessed it, her boyfriend, our friends. We eventually put mouse traps in the attic, but of course never caught a mouse. The food on the trap would never be touched. The scratching persisted night after night. I recall throwing the blankets over my head and calling out, "In the name of Jesus, go away." You must understand, throughout this time I was actively praying. I never became a devil worshiper or anything of the sort. I listened to worship music in the morning and played Ouija board at night for fun. I was also practicing lucid dreaming, meditation, and heavily studying the law of attraction. I'm a super optimistic person and can easily be naive. Looking back, all of these things made me the perfect candidate for demonic oppression. The 3 final encounters with this oppression would occur in a single weekend. I worked at a bank during the day and closed a cash office for retail at night. I leave in the morning, come home at night. I drove a Subaru Outback. We lived right off a well-traveled county road, so I always locked my car doors at night. Always. I remember this distinctively because it was my very first time owning a key fob. One morning as I reached out to open my car door, I find that it's already opened, unlocked and ajar, resting as though it had been gently placed to sit but not to close. I immediately thought my car had been broken into, but as I checked, I found my iPad, some cash, and other small valuables. Perplexed but unshaken, I drove to work. I worked 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the bank and took my lunch at 12 p.m. I walked to the parking lot during my lunch, and as I got closer to my car, my jaw dropped. I quietly gasped. "No fucking way," I whispered underneath my breath. I started speed walking to my car. I got to my vehicle and the driver's side of the door was open again, ajar but resting. That eerie, deliberate feeling of being tricked came over me, like someone was watching and laughing. I looked over both shoulders, checked the parking lot and my car. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing stolen, nothing to explain this. I knew I closed my door. I knew I locked my car. In fact, every other door was still locked. In that moment, I realized without a shred of doubt, whatever this thing is, it can follow me. It is following me. Finally, I was terrified. Until then, I hadn't collectively pieced together the pounding on the door while I showered, the burned page in my notebook, the missing and then quickly replaced makeup, the relentless scratching above my bed at night. As the oppression inched closer and closer to me, it finally found its way into my car. It was after me. It was with me. I was terrified. But I was also 18, invincible, and felt oddly attracted to seeing this thing play out. Honestly, I wasn't sure what to do next anyway. There was also the thought in the back of my mind that I was making it all up, imagining things. Even with Jacqueline and many others as witnesses, I wouldn't allow myself to understand how deadly this could possibly be until it was too late. The final encounter was the following morning after my car door was found open twice in a 24-hour period. It was Saturday morning and I was driving down the well-traveled county road to the bank. I always sped and usually was doing my makeup in the rear view mirror. I can attest on this particular morning, I was not doing anything other than driving. I was not distracted. I admit I was going about 10 miles per hour over the speed limit. Both hands gripped on the wheel, no music on. My right peripheral catches a glimpse of a metal landmarker to the side of the road. I didn't even have time to blink when the wheel was ripped out of my grasp and spun to the right. I was flying up an embankment, my car completely airborne. I'd never been in a car accident, let alone off-roading at high speeds upwards into a field. I had no control over the vehicle and no time to maneuver a correction. I knew I was going to die or be severely hurt. I closed my eyes and braced myself as hard as I could. I clung to the steering wheel with white knuckles and drove the brake into the ground as hard as I could. I only had breath to muster one single word out of my mouth. Jesus. I was ready to meet him. I didn't open my eyes until every crash, crunch, and metal twisting scraping sound was completely silent. My vehicle was up in the embankment and had just ripped an entire telephone pole out of the ground. The giant pole swung in the road, still attached to phone lines. My Outback was spewing smoke and completely totaled. I stepped out of my vehicle on 2 feet unscathed. I immediately broke down in sobs. What in the fuck just happened? The one and only car directly behind me was an all-black SUV. It was at a complete stop. When I looked over to it, expecting the driver to get out and run to me to come console me, the SUV started to accelerate. It slowly drove around the still swaying telephone pole and sped off. It was like a hitman that missed his target and needed to leave the scene. They just drove off. In the moment, I believed this was a complete asshole. As I look back, that vehicle abandoning me and driving away seemingly as a mission failed is extremely symbolic, as what was meant to happen to me that morning. I was supposed to die. Someone failed. Someone lost, and it wasn't me. I stayed at my parents' house for 2 days and nights. I didn't dare tell them what happened, certainly not my mother. I had no logical reasons to give for the cause of the crash. I remember sleeping for what felt like an entire 48 hours. I never went to the hospital. I didn't need to. I only had 2 bruises on my knees from bracing myself against the dash. I wasn't even wearing a seatbelt. Had I died, it would have been classified a freak accident. An unexplained car accident with an unprepared driver. There was nothing accidental about the wreck. When I returned home, Jacqueline and I burned the Ouija board in our fireplace. It was the one and only fire we'd burn. I swore witchcraft of any kind off, and I would never touch anything of the sort again. I'm positive that spirit still lurks for me. I've had small encounters here and there, but as I strengthen my walk with God, I simultaneously lessen my walk with evil. The spirit realm of good and evil, life and death is real, y'all. I will continue to tell my encounters to those who think it's fun and games, make-believe, or just scary stories. I used to think that too. I mean, after all, Ouija boards are sold in retail game sections. You've been warned. Alright guys, and then she left a picture. Wow, look at that. It could have definitely been way worse, but I'm glad she's okay, and I'm glad she burned that thing. Alright guys, so these are all the stories for today. Let me know if you have ever played with the Ouija board or know someone that's played with the Ouija board. Please share the experiences. I would love to read them. Anyway, I will see you guys next time. Bye.